everyone. Welcome to our live discussion with Brandon Mull. My name is Callie Hansen from Shadow Mountain Publishing, and I will be hosting today. For those of you joining, let us know where you're all watching from. And Brandon Mull, as many of you know, is the #1 New York Times bestselling author of Fablehaven, Beyonders, and the Five Kingdoms series. He is a kinetic thinker. Brandon enjoys bouncy balls, squeezable stress toys, and popping bubble wrap. He lives in Utah in a happy little valley near the mouth of a canyon with his wife Erlyn, their 11 children, and a dog named Buffy the Vampire Slayer. So, Brandon, many people joining us today have been rereading the Fablehaven series since January of this year. And we just finished reading the first Dragonwatch book. And so we wanted to discuss all things Fablehaven and Dragonwatch with you today. So I hope that sounds great.
That sounds really good. It's fun to talk to people that are already kind of into it, because then we can get into nerdy details and stuff like that, which is great.
It totally is. So if any of you watching have a question for Brandon, post it in the comments and we'll hopefully be able to answer those before the end of the video. But for now, let's jump right in. We had some fans ask questions already, so I want to get to those first. So Jasmine W. asked, how do you come up with so many names for people, creatures, and magical items?
Yeah. I do put thought into names, because to me, the perfect fantasy name is, and when I say fantasy name, when we're talking about like a fantasy character or a fantasy creature, to me, the perfect fantasy name is something kind of new and different, but also reasonably easy to pronounce. And so finding those kind of names, at least for me, takes some time, takes some thought. So sometimes I make up the name. To me, for example, like the perfect fantasy name to me is Gandalf, right? Easy to say, easy to spell, and you don't have a friend at school named Gandalf usually.
No.
And so that's the kind of name I'm looking for wizards or trolls, like something that's different but cool. And so what do I do to find these names? I'll get like a big fat name your baby book and flip through that. I'll look at lists of foreign names, like get online and type, like Scandinavian names or, Hindu names, or just basically anything I can think of, just to get myself into pools of different names than I always see in my life or in my culture. And then it's sometimes just making up names, right? Like finding syllables that work together and making up a fantasy name. And like my only guiding star is, does it feel right? Right? like it's not science, but I am trying to find names that, for reasons I can't completely articulate, sort of match the feel of the character. That's why I comb through lots of names. Every now and then a name just hits me. But the general answer to this question is kind of lots of time, lots of thinking, lots of searching is how I hunt down names for things. When I'm looking for naming like items and stuff like that, then sometimes I'm trying to use maybe more familiar words, right? Like I have a weapon called the Unforgiving Blade in Dragonwatch, and that's just using, words we know, unforgiving. But Unforgiving Blade, I'd never seen those two things put together before, Unforgiving Blade. And so that's what made it feel a little other or a little different. I don't know. That's some of the thinking off the top of my head.
Yeah, that's so great. Naming can be super hard, especially when you're talking about fantasy creatures from your head. Like, I can only imagine.
Yeah, like what do you name a goblin? And then you go like, well, what should a goblin name sound like? And that's probably sounds a little more guttural or a little more, and what do you name a fairy? And that's going to sound a little more ethereal, or, and like all that.
Exactly. Yeah, I love that. So Jenna wants to know, how old is Bracken?
That's a great question. And it's sort of a complicated question, which is sort of getting answered toward the end of Dragonwatch. And it's a complicated question because Bracken is semi-eternal. And so, he's almost eternal. He's not quite eternal. He's not quite in his final eternal state, but unicorns are close. They're way more eternal beings than they are temporal beings in my universe, right? Like, so it's almost like our age scales don't apply because they're on a different scale, if that makes sense. I think if he were to become mortal, he would be around 17, and that's like his vibe, right? But he's been 17 a long, long time, if that makes sense. So that's why it's kind of hard to say how old he is. So how old is he on our scale? He's probably thousands of years old. How old is he on his scale? He's about 17.
Awesome. I know that's pretty good to know because he did show up in the end of Fablehaven, and I don't know if that was specified or not, but very helpful.
Yeah, and in my head, and you'll get more specifics before Dragonwatch is done, a little bit more about his age, because we just get into, there's Ronodin and Bracken stuff toward the end of Dragonwatch where you'll get some details, extra details about them.
I'm excited. So is Ronodin older or younger than Bracken?
They are around the same age.
Okay.
And I haven't defined which is older. And, so with that question, I'll just say that they're around the same age. They kind of come from this more eternal state or eternal place where it's a little more fuzzy on how old are they. But, I think if anything, probably Bracken came a little ahead of Ronodin. I think Bracken might be slightly older, but how many years older, it's hard to say because, like I say, they're from this kind of more of an eternal state where they, that they grew up together. Let's just say that, right?
Yeah. That's awesome. So this question comes from Megan. If you could visit a specific moment in any of the Fablehaven books, what would it be?
Yeah, that was a good question. That's a hard one because I live this stuff in my head pretty vividly, and so it's in my imagination I've been to a lot of these places, and if I could physically go there and like really literally experience it and live it, there's a lot of moments to choose from that would be fun. I guess for me, I'd try to go to if I had to pick one, I'd go to one of the grandest moments where I could see the most. And that would be something like maybe the last battle in Fablehaven, where the Zizix battle, because I'd get to see a lot of demons, I'd get to see a lot of dragons, I'd get to see a lot of fairies, I'd get to see a lot of action. And that's assuming I could go there safely, I guess. But if I could go wherever I could go, if I knew I would be safe, I'd probably go to a big battle scene like that, so I could just have a lot to absorb.
Yeah, that would be exciting. The last battle, that would be so fun, and also kind of terrifying a little bit, I think.
Yeah, it would be terrifying. It would be a huge, crazy thrill. I mean, that's one of the things that would be fun to see on screen someday. Like that.
Oh yeah.
That might be as close as I get to actually going there, right?
Yeah.
Maybe someday someone will dramatize it on screen and do a good job. That'd be cool.
Hopefully. Crossing my fingers.
Yeah.
So Jasmine also wanted to know, what do your children think about your books?
Yeah. My kids grew up with me doing this. So I published my first book, which was Fablehaven 1 in 2006. And at that time, my oldest Sadie, she was just a little toddler back then. And so they grew up with me writing this stuff. And I'm in the lucky category where they kind of got into it and liked it. I think for a while there, Sadie was probably the number one Fablehaven fan in the world. She had things almost memorized, read the books over and over. And so that was kind of fun that it was a way I could kind of bond with my daughter. They now help out by, when I do launch parties, they'll sometimes play some of the characters. When we do book trailers, my kids will play some of the characters. So they're very willing to help out. They think it's fun and nerdy in a good way. And for me, it's great that I get to kind of bond with my kids and my family over it. In fact, a lot of my family, when we do events, will sometimes come out dressed up as characters, and some of them are being really good sports because like fantasy isn't like my dad's number one thing. Not that he hates it, but he's not a guy I would picture like dressing up like a wizard, but he'll do it because he loves me sometimes at some of the launch parties. So that's kind of fun.
Yeah, it's so fun to have a supportive family who will be there for your books and dress up and maybe even be in some book trailers.
I know, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that to me is fun, and it's fun that my kids know the books. I can sometimes fact check by asking them questions because they know the books pretty well.
Yeah, a lot of people are saying that they love Sadie as Kendra in the book trailers, so she does amazing.
Yeah, she does a good job. It's funny that she grew up to be such a decent match for the character, kind of.
Yeah, most definitely. So Tommy wants to know, who's your favorite character that you have introduced in Fablehaven or Dragonwatch?
And that's one of the hard ones because I go to lengths to only write about characters that kind of interest me for one reason or another. I mean, one of my favorite characters is Seth. He's just fun to write because the mix of him being reckless but having a good heart and being kind of funny makes him really fun to write. Makes it really fun when he's part of the story. For me as a writer, it's fun when there's trouble.
Yeah.
That's when the story gets interesting, and having Seth around tends to generate unpredictable trouble because he's a curious enough and reckless enough kid that that even I, as the author, am not always sure what he's going to do in a scene until I kind of get him there and feel it out. So that's fun because sometimes writing Seth, there's surprises even for me. But different characters are fun for different reasons. Like the character Ronodin in Dragonwatch is really fun for me to write. He's kind of a villain, but he's a charismatic villain in a way that to me it's really fun to get inside his head and try to bring him to life. Like even just writing a character like Growlithe, like an ancient demon on his deathbed, trying to make that feel right, trying to make that hit the way I want it to hit. For me as a writer, it's all just really fun. It's like playing with my favorite puppets and trying to bring them to life in ways that I find convincing. And so there's a few answers to that question. A few characters I like writing.
I'm sure. And choosing favorites is like the worst, especially when you have a hard time making decisions.
And it's so fair. I mean, it's a question that I would wonder too. It's a great question. It's just, but yeah, it's hard to choose among a bunch of characters that to me are interesting for different reasons. It's sometimes hard to pick one.
Oh yeah. So, speaking of your antagonists like Growlithe and Ronodin, Brittany wants to know, where do you get your inspiration for your antagonists?
Yeah, that's good. I mean, it's funny because one of the old standard sayings for writers is write what you know. And there's truth in that, because if you write stuff that you know well or familiar with, you can do a better job usually bringing that to life or writing it in an interesting or convincing way. And for me, that's always been an interesting problem because I like to write fantasy. And so how do you know fantasy? Write what you know. And I say, well, what I know is dragons and unicorns. And well, how is that what you know? And the answer is, well, I like those kind of books. I like those kind of movies. And I spend a lot of time in my head daydreaming about dragons and adventures and ogres. And really the way I come to know that stuff is daydreaming about it a lot. And the other books and movies in the category that I read. And so this is true for enemies. This is true for bad guys. I don't know a lot of people in my normal real life who are, murderers or who are trying to take over the world or who mean great harm to people. Like I don't associate with people like that. I just don't have them in my life. But I associate with people like that in the books I read and the movies I see. And so I guess I partly borrow from other people's imaginations. I borrow from characters in books or maybe even figures from history a little bit. And then it's my imagination. It's for me, I want to write villains who I understand what they want and why. I want to write villains who are who make sense, that their actions make sense to themselves. And to me, as long as I can make sense of their actions, like why their actions make sense to themselves, that helps me bring them to life. And that helps me, create how they think. And it's weird because I really don't want to take over the world. I generally am kind of a rule follower, and I'm generally fairly nice to people. And at the same time, it's sometimes fun to go, if I wanted to take over the world, what would I do? What are the ruthless means I might employ? And what would be some of the tactics that I could use if I didn't have a conscience, or, you know what I mean? Or if my conscience was very different. And so and occasionally, because I'm writing fantasy, sometimes I'm even trying to write villains that I don't understand, that I want to be kind of unknowable. Like I've got this guy, the Underking, and it's an unknowable kind of evil where I can't fully relate to it. And so I just have to imagine the fun thought experiment of trying to imagine something that is kind of unknowable and kind of wants bad things for reasons that I can't make rational, but at least make it coherent or consistent with itself. And I don't know, those are some thoughts that go through my mind as I write villains.
Yeah, that's the fun thing about writing, is being able to write the unknown. So you may not associate with people who are terrible, but it's the idea of creating someone that's in direct conflict with your heroes that's really exciting.
Yeah, no, that's very well said, Callie. And at the end of the day, wanting to create a cool effect with whatever you do, right? Like I want to be able to look at that and go, yeah, that villain is interesting to me. That villain is scary to me. That, trying to help that villain produce the effects that I'm after in the story.
Exactly. So that being said, if there was anything you could change about the Fablehaven series, is there something you would change?
Yeah, what would I change? Like it's tricky. If I rewrote book one, I know I would probably pace the start of the book faster. That's my sensibilities now. Is I would pace it a little faster, and in some ways it would lose something if I paced it faster. So maybe it was lucky that it wasn't my current brain writing book one, because the fact that it starts a little slow, it helps. I think it helps that fantasy unfold in a gradual way that makes it a little more exciting and believable. If I were rewriting Fablehaven, I don't know. Like I'm pretty happy with how it turned out. The story feels pretty real to me, and I've been building off those original ideas for so long that it becomes hard to think of what I would change. I think I left enough opportunities open where, like, as I went into Dragonwatch and found lots of new ideas and room for lots of new story, that I feel pretty good about what the story is. There's probably nothing huge I would change.
Right. And as you've been writing Dragonwatch, it's been an opportunity to expound on that, like you said.
Yeah.
Which I had a thought. So, like, at the end of Fablehaven Book 5, there's a note at the end to fans that there was no plans to continue the series. So I was curious, like, at what point did you seriously start pursuing the Dragonwatch sequel series?
Yeah. Well, and honestly, like in that same note at the end of book 5, I did say it's possible I could go back to it someday, but I just didn't have a plan for it. I just didn't have anything ready to go. I didn't have anything in my head. Because even when I finished it, though I had no plan to go back to Fablehaven, I just didn't have a plan. I kind of used up all the story that I dreamed up, and yet it was a story world that I liked, and so there was always this feeling inside of, hey, if I find the right idea, maybe I'll return to it. So what happened with Dragonwatch was I finished writing Fablehaven in 2010. I was content with the 5-book series. I thought it did a good job of finishing the story I started and leaving a few things to be curious about at the end. And as I thought about the Fablehaven series as a whole, the more time went by, the more I felt like when they were at the Dragon Sanctuary in book 4, that was one of my favorite parts of the series. And it started me thinking, like, wow, like we spent a lot of time at Fablehaven, which is a smaller preserve than Wormroost, with less diversity and of creatures and probably less powerful creatures. was like, what would it be like to spend some serious time at Wormroost and really explore that place and explore more thoroughly the world of dragons, and maybe explore more thoroughly how the whole thing's set up, and where magic comes from in Fablehaven and how it works. And, because I left a lot of things in Fablehaven, unexplained or unanswered. Like certain rules of magic were explained, but kind of the origin story for why are there magical creatures in our world, a lot of that kind of stuff I didn't even try to get into. And the more I thought about it, the more I was like, yeah, I want to explain a little bit more about the Fablehaven universe. I want to explore a little bit more how magic works, a little bit more about where, and I didn't want to answer all the questions because that leaves mystery out, but I just wanted to explore it more deeply, and still preserving plenty of mystery. And I realized that a way to do that would be if I created a story that centered on the dragon sanctuaries, that centered on the dragons, and that would take us to some places we hadn't been and let us explore Wormroost more thoroughly, and let us explore maybe a higher level conflict than we had going on in Fablehaven, and this worldwide dragon rebellion. And basically, the more I thought about it, the more excited I got to write it, and Dragonwatch was born. I decided I could almost make a second half to the Fablehaven story that centered more on the dragon sanctuaries, and that's what I've written now.
That's so exciting, and it's been so fun to return to the world after so long. Now we're like creeping up to the finale in October, so lots of exciting things. So what was your favorite part about revisiting the world of Fablehaven when you started writing Dragonwatch?
Yeah, one of my favorite parts was writing those familiar characters. It was sort of like visiting with old friends. It was fun to find, as I started to make Seth and Kendra live and breathe again and have experiences and thoughts and say things, that it was fun that I could do it. It was fun that they still felt there. Like in fact, in some ways, I knew them better than when I first wrote them because I'd spent a lot of time with them already. And so it really did feel like I was meeting up with a bunch of old friends. And I always liked the story world of Fablehaven. I mean, there's a reason it was my first series. It was a story world that really drew me. And so going back there has just felt really, really fun. Like legitimately fun to have characters where some of them, like Seth, Seth almost writes himself. When I put Seth in a scene, I'm familiar enough with the character that he just kind of comes to life really easy for me.
That's so fun. Especially when it's super easy to write. Like it can be so hard to get ideas down on paper.
Yeah, it can be. And that's not to say I don't get stuck sometimes, but one of the fun things was some of the characters felt so familiar that they came to life in this familiar, easy way. And that was fun. It was like, it really was like hanging out with old friends. And it's really weird that my friends are people I make up in my imagination, but yeah, I have a category of friends who are fictional.
Yeah.
and some of the people in that category are not my fictional characters, right? Like I'm friends with Harry Potter. I'm friends with a lot of people, and it's just all in my head. But hey, it's a cool, weird kind of friendship to have these fictional people that I enjoy.
Oh yeah. And and more than we're returning to the world of Fablehaven, we're returning to Seth and Kendra's story, but you also introduced some new characters, namely Kendra and Seth's cousins, Nox and Tess. So I was curious what your decision was, like what was behind that to include these new characters in the series.
Sure. To me, some of the fun of a new series is to have some fresh blood in it. And especially with Fablehaven, where part of the fun of Fablehaven is that magic is hidden all around us, right? Like part of the premise is that, what if there's these secret wildlife parks almost hidden in plain sight, where if you just drunk the right magic milk, you would see, whoa, that deer is a centaur, or that horse is a centaur, that butterfly is a fairy, that goat's a satyr. And so because that's part of the premise, I thought it would be fun to have a couple new characters where this was all new to them, right? Where they were just barely opening their eyes to this world around us, because Kendra and Seth were so familiar with it. I think seeing it from their point of view is fun too, because they're familiar with it, but they don't have the same wonder anymore than a newbie would have. Right.
Right.
So people new to the world bring some new wonder into the story, like Knox being, very much kind of an unbeliever kind of kid, like, and then Tess being like almost an over believer kind of kid.
Yeah.
Those were two new perspectives that I thought would be fun to see how they would react to fairies and dragons and ogres and adventures.
Yes. And Knox gets involved in a little bit of a different way at the end of Dragonwatch than you would think.
Yeah. He almost his lack of belief sort of works to their advantage in some ways in the series, and especially in the end of Dragonwatch, book 1.
Yeah. So Tamara, along those same lines, she asked, are there any more of Seth's cousins that are involved in the magical world that we don't know about?
That is a good question. Not that we know about, not that I've cooked up yet, but there could be. I think he comes from a fairly large family where I don't think there's other cousins that are involved yet. Let's say that.
Okay.
So there are other cousins perhaps that could get involved, but not other ones that are involved yet.
Makes sense. Ike would like to know, was Patton part of Dragonwatch?
Yeah, I think he was. I think he was involved with that organization and those people. Patton, in my mind, had a way of really getting around. I think he was involved in almost everything that you could get involved with. He was, he was that kind of guy. He was one of my favorite characters to write.
He was quite the exciting character, and I know a lot of fans they love Patton a lot, just as much as you, and they want to know if there will be a Patton Burgess series like ever.
I think if having finished book 5 of Dragonwatch, which is done, I really feel like I finished the second half of the Fablehaven story, and that the Kendra and Seth Fablehaven story is, in my head, now complete. And I think when readers get to the end of Dragonwatch, I think the Fablehaven story will feel more complete than it did when they got to the end of Fablehaven. I mean, I think it feels just more complete, more done. And that's because everyone's dead. I'm just kidding. I don't know why it is. I'm just being dumb. But I want people to be worried. But I do think when you get to the end of Dragonwatch, you go, okay, yeah, that feels, this story feels more complete, more finished, even than when I finished book 5 of Fablehaven. And I hope they feel that way. That's how I feel. I feel like it's the second half of the story. And I have no current plans to return to Fablehaven. But if I did, like one of the most obvious places to return to me would be some sort of prequel involving Patton. That seems like that could be really fun. It seems like there's room for story there. It seems like a character that readers have liked and that I like. And so, yeah, if the right story forms, a book like that could totally happen. It's just I got to let that one cook for a while because I don't have it figured out yet. And basically, kind of like with Dragonwatch, I was like, if I go back to the Fablehaven world, I have to have a legitimately cool story to tell, because I didn't want to have Fable, because I feel like Fablehaven crescendoed and it ended strong, and book 5 was a good ride, and I didn't want to then add a little whimper at the end of it. You know what I mean? Like almost do something that kind of undid how fun that was. I wanted to make sure Dragonwatch built it bigger and better instead of made it feel like some sort of afterthought. And I would want a Patton book to do this. I think I succeeded. I think if people read through Dragonwatch, they'll get to the end and go, that was an even better ride than Fablehaven. I really think that. And that's what let me write it, because I thought I had an idea that I could do that with. And so it's the same with Patton. If I don't want to write a Patton prequel that disappoints everybody and disappoints me.
I don't think you could write anything that disappoints people.
That's really nice. But maybe even part of that is because I try not to write it until I have something good. You know what I mean? And so if I get something good, if I get something that I'm excited about, I would totally do it.
Cool. Well, I can't wait until that day comes.
Yeah, that would be fun. I would be excited too. It would be fun for me too. I hope I find the right thing.
For sure. So In the Fablehaven book club, your mom said that people wonder where Brandon Mull got his inspiration for Seth, and shared this photo, which I'll pull up on the screen here. And so I was just wondering, who was the inspiration for Seth?
All right, so I'm the tall kid there, the tallest of the little crew, and my sister Summer is the center of those three girls. My brother Bryson is the kid with the camo shirt whose arms are spread wide. And there were definitely attributes of my little brother Bryson, who was a recklessly curious kid and who had some Seth-like attributes that they're Seth-like because I took them from Bryson. He liked to wear his camouflage shirt around, as you can see in that picture. He's got a little granola bar box affixed to his belt that's full of survival gear and stuff. So that's like his emergency kit. And a side note, the little girl with the yellow sleeves, her name was Kendra. That was my little sister's best friend. And my little brother's best friend was named Seth, and that was where I got the names for Kendra and Seth. So that picture has a lot of the little seeds that grew into the characters Kendra and Seth, like I guess, like the names and stuff like that.
It was so cute to see that picture. It was like blast from the past, and super cool to see that like you do draw some of your inspiration from some people that you know.
Yeah, I can't help it. I think as a writer, I think most writers I know, and at least I can at least speak for myself. I just draw from everything I've got, right? And so that's
Right.
the people I know, and that's the books I read, and the experiences I have, and it all influences me. And so while my character is not Seth is not my brother Bryson, there are differences between those people too. There were definitely some things about Bryson that influenced the character Seth, some good details, and that helped me understand the character better.
Right. So Rebecca said, I found Kendra to be an inspirational character who, even in times of darkness, fights back. Well, she asked if Kendra's based on anyone you know, but is there anything more you wanted to expound on, like Kendra's character? Like you got her name from your sister's friends, but is there anyone else that you know that kind of based her off?
Yeah, Kendra isn't as easy for me to nail down as Seth. Seth had some definite things that were kind of like my brother Bryson. Kendra had some attributes that are a little bit like my sister Summer, but my sister Summer is also quite different from Kendra. My sister Summer is more of a daredevil than Kendra is. Kendra, I took Kendra from some of the more responsible girls I knew in my life. I wanted Kendra to be a responsible kid who was having to learn the opposite lessons of Seth. I wanted Seth to be a generally reckless, irresponsible kid who was learning that there are times to be more careful. And I wanted Kendra to be a responsible kid who was learning there are times to take risks and be reckless. And kind of what you just said, she ends up being this character who really stands up for herself and for others in tough times. And that's not how she started, I don't think. I think she started with the intention to be that person, but not necessarily with the daring to be that person. And I think we saw in book one, it really stretched her to take some of the risks she took at the end of Fablehaven book one. And it kind of opened up this whole new world to her that, oh yeah, I can be careful and responsible. And there are times when, yeah, I might have to color outside the lines or take a giant risk for the right reason or the right cause. And so Kendra, to me, she maybe even more comes from my own nature, which tends to be a rule follower that's gradually learning to take risks. You know what I mean? Like there's, I don't know. I'm a mix of them both. Sometimes I can totally be a Seth, especially when I was a little boy. When I was a little boy, there was a ton of Seth in me. As I got older, something about school broke me, like turned me into a rule keeper, like a rule follower. And some of that maybe, sometimes it's not bad to unlearn some of that in emergencies, right?
Yeah. So one question from the comments I wanted to touch on was from Michelle. As a writer, do you ever find that you have like zero idea of the outcome of a situation until you're writing it?
Yeah, sometimes.
So she also follows up with that. Like, is it a good place to write from, or is it better to plan ahead?
Oh, yeah. So my answer to that is both. Like for me, and it might be different. Like different heads do this different ways. What you have to have at the end of the day is a story that's coherent and makes sense and has good setups and payoffs, and where the reader can feel like, oh, he had something to tell here. Like this character had a journey to go on, and it was an interesting journey. And whatever gets you there, cool. If you improvise the whole thing and it does that, great. If you plan the whole thing and it does that, great. For me, I like to go in with a plan, partly because I accept money from a publisher when I make a contract to do books, right? And so, like, for my own sanity, and I need to have some kind of plan, feel like I have some sort of destination for my story. And yet the plan is always flexible, because I can't help making discoveries as I get to know the characters better, scene by scene. And as I make discoveries, it sometimes really affects the outcome of the story. Or certainly there's lots of scenes, all right, where I'm not sure about the outcome of this particular scene, though I know generally what I want the story to be. And so for me, there's lots of happy little discoveries along the way. And that's part of the joy of writing is finding stuff that works, or, even hallelujah, works better than your plan. Like, that's a really cool feeling.
Oh yeah, it totally is. Another question I wanted to ask from some of the fans. Tamara wanted to know, how is the dark a source of power?
Yeah, because maybe it's more obvious and easy to see the power that could come from light, right? Because it's bright and dazzling. But I mean, I think just think emotionally or spiritually. Like there is power in dark. There like the power in dark is like, think Dark Side of the Force or something, right? It's like It's like anger and hate. And there's power there, like that can move you to action, and that can give you resolve and strength, and it can make things happen. It's not, maybe to me, it's not as pleasant to power. You know what I mean? Like, to me, it's kind of an ugly kind of power, but there's definitely power there. I mean, like, there are people who, with darkness and with evil, have accomplished world-changing things, right? I mean, like, there's been, led by dark principles, people have changed the face of society, or changed the borders of nations, or ruined or controlled kingdoms. And so, like, I mean, I'm saying, if you think about it, yeah, there is a lot of power in the spiritually or emotionally dark side of life. And to me, there's a more beautiful and a more wholesome and a more satisfying power in light. I feel like often dark power delivers a lot of its rewards kind of up front and then leaves you worse off. Whereas I think light power sometimes is a little more subtle, but more long-term rewarding. That's my opinion. And that's partly what I dramatize in the books a little bit.
Yeah, it's really cool how you kind of weave those things together and take a deep approach to the outside world and things like that. Like, and in the same vein of like deep questions, Elijah wanted to know what would happen if a mortal wore one of the crowns.
Yeah. So we've got these 5 monarchs that we learn about in Dragonwatch, and we'd been introduced to at least a few of them in Fablehaven, that there's these monarchs, right? A dragon king, a demon king, a fairy queen, and then in Dragonwatch we learn about an under king and a giant queen, and they wear these crowns of power, and the different crowns have different powers. You'll learn more about the crowns and their powers quite a bit more by the end of Dragonwatch. By the end of book 5, you'll know a lot more about that stuff, and even by the end of book 4, you learn quite a bit. And as to what would happen if a mortal used it, you'll get to see a little bit of that if you read all of Dragonwatch. You'll get to see a little bit of some mortals maybe using some of that power in different ways. What generally happens in one of my premises of Fablehaven is that magic is not for mortals. Like the fundamental nature of magical creatures is different than the nature of mortals here in this temporary mortal world where we are born and live a life and then die. And then I picture the magical creatures as being in a more eternal type state. And so a lot of their power and their magic doesn't interface really well with us. And so it's hard for the magical creatures to interact with mortals without being changed by the experience. And it's hard for mortals to interact with magical creatures without being changed by the experience. And so I would say for any mortal to wield powerful magic long term, the danger is you could lose your mortality kind of and become more like a magical creature than like a mortal. I guess that would be the biggest potential change or danger. That
sounds really crazy.
Yeah.
And exciting at the same time. So I had one more question I wanted to ask. Which character in Fablehaven or Dragonwatch do you identify with most?
Fablehaven and Dragonwatch. It's hard. It's hard not to identify with my main characters a lot. I just spend so much time with them. So I probably identify the most with Seth and Kendra because I just spend so much time with them. But it's interesting as a writer, there's things I identify with in all my characters. I don't know how to not write that way. I don't know how to not. I don't know how to write characters that I don't kind of relate to in some way on some level. And so there's things I can relate to about the opinions and of all the different characters that I write. So that's kind of a broad answer, but it's true.
That is all good. We had some other little silly questions come through that I did want to ask.
Sure.
So like Sarah touches on, why was Humbugal named Humbugal?
Humbugal. Humbugal is a really important character in Dragonwatch. He's my demonic trickster dwarf. And there's a great history in fantasy of having these kind of powerful tricksters, kind of Loki type characters.
Yes.
And Humbugal's that for me. Humbugal's my trickster who is probably more entertained by his own cleverness than he is by what he's winning or losing. For him, it's about the contest. It's about the battle of wits. It's about the cleverness. And I wanted him to be a character who was not as interested in like the stronger knight will win the fight. Like he's like, I don't like fights like that. That's boring. Like I want the more clever one to win because that's what he values about himself is his cleverness, right? So he's trying to create contests that are won more by cleverness and trickery and intelligence than necessarily by brute strength. And so given all those things, I was like, okay, what do I name this guy? Like what? And I wanted the name to kind of have this feeling that was old or ancient. And so I was like, okay, well, what about like Christmas Carol where they say humbug, right? Bah humbug. And I was like, what if I took humbug and made it into a person, a little demon dwarf, Humbugal. I was like, okay, yeah, that's because it kind of gives it a little bit of resonance with something like a word that's kind of familiar and kind of has some flavor to it, even though it's not a word we say a lot. And that was about as deep as the thinking went. Once I had Humbugal in my head, kind of working off bah humbug. Once I had Humbugal in my head, I was like, yeah, that's the feel I want. I wanted it to be, because he's a trickster dwarf, I want it to be kind of a sing-song name, and Humbugal just kind of had a sort of a sing-song sound to it for me.
Oh yeah, and silly names can go a long way.
Yeah. I wanted it to be silly, and I wanted it to feel like just a little dark. And to me, that humbug correlation made it feel a little like grumpy or something,
Right. And as you deal in fantasy a lot, because you've written a lot of different fantasy series, Michelle also wanted to know if you've ever done any tabletop RPGs.
Yep, like Dungeons and Dragons kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like my cousin would always he introduced me to a few I didn't know about, like some superhero RPGs or like sci-fi RPGs that were fun. But probably the main one I've played is Dungeons and Dragons, like the granddaddy of them all. And yeah, like I think I went through my teenage years. I did it a lot more, and then I kind of went through a drought because I didn't really have anybody to play with, and I was just busy writing my books. But then one of my adult friends named Jason, who I sometimes go to Comic-Con with, he started playing games sometimes, especially on the weekends when we went to San Diego Comic-Con. He'd organize a game, and yeah. So in the recent years, I've played a little bit again, and it's just fun. To me, it's organized imagining, and to me, it's just a different form of storytelling. And yeah, I think it's fun.
And any kind of games are fun to play, especially when they give you some new ideas, right?
Yeah, to me, it's like part of the reason I know a lot of weapons and medieval castle terminology is playing Dungeons and Dragons as a kid and reading those players' handbooks and monster manuals, and they had lots of information about weapons and medieval stuff. And yeah, it was a great way to play a game and also do research if you were going to be a fantasy author someday.
Oh yeah, most definitely. So one question that I did see quite a bit, and fans are very excited for Dragonwatch Book 5, Return of the Dragon Slayers. So she wants to know, are Kendra and Bracken going to kiss?
Yeah, I see why you would want to know that. I can't tell you. I just can't tell you. But I can tell you there will be relationship stuff with Kendra and Bracken before the series is over. We'll do some more relationship stuff with them. And there's been some forces sort of keeping them apart in Dragonwatch, and that's partly because I need Kendra to be kind of on her own journey, and Bracken's a pretty powerful character, and too much Bracken in the series would I think he would take over some of the scenes that Kendra's in, and so I created some excuses to and had some tough things happen that Kendra has to deal with that kept them apart for part of the series. But before the series is over, we'll have some more relationship stuff with them and see what happens.
Ooh, sounds exciting.
I hope it's exciting. I think book 5 turned out really good. It's one of what I think is one of my best books I've written, and hopefully you guys will like it. If you liked 4, I think 5's even better. So that could maybe be a way to gauge, but
oh yeah,
we'll see.
So speaking of Dragonwatch Book 5, without giving us too many spoilers, because we don't want any spoilers at all. If you could describe Dragonwatch in 5 words, Book 5, what words would you use?
Oh yeah, okay.
Take your time. We're all waiting on the edge of our seats.
I'd say the true finale of Fablehaven. That's what I would say. This is the true finale of kind of both series. Like it'll be the grandest and most epic of all the Fablehaven books. I think like there's the most going on as far as like the scale of epicness, or the scale of like high stakes, worldwide adventure, like learning more than we've ever learned about the universe, the characters making some of their hardest choices they've ever made, like that kind of stuff will all be present. It's a true fireworks finale for Fablehaven and Dragonwatch. That's way more than 5 words, but that's elaborating.
That's so great, and it makes me even more excited for Dragonwatch 5 coming this fall. Remind us what date it will be available.
October something?
October 26th.
26? Is that it? I thought it was 20 something, but then I was scared to get too specific if I was wrong. So
nope, you're good. I got you covered. The 26th of October, it will be available in stores.
That book is written. It does exist. Yep. I feel really good about it. It's written and edited, and yeah, I'm really excited to share it and hear what people think, because fingers crossed, I think people will have fun with it.
I think so too. So we have just a few questions in the chat that I wanted to ask you before we wrap up. So Ben wants to know how you balance work life, like writing and deadlines, and family time, especially now since you're newly remarried and have a lot more kids.
Life has been, I mean, this one of the things I learned by living life is you can't always predict what's going to happen. And one of the things I never would have thought, I would have never thought I would go through a divorce. I just never predicted it or expected it. And then it happened. And maybe it's, it's just part of life, right? I think there's people who didn't think they would lose a leg and wouldn't have never chosen it. And then they lose a leg. And then you got to figure out, okay, well, how do I keep going having lost a leg? And that's kind of what the divorce felt like to me. Like it felt like it sort of threw off life for me. And then I got remarried about a year ago. I found a wonderful woman that has 7 kids. And so that just made my family explode. And so now there's the 4 moles and the 7 Baker kids, and we're all blending together into one big family. And that's, it's really busy. But what was the original question? I think I'm now
How you find your work-life balance?
Yeah, balancing it. So I had to rediscover a new equilibrium, right? And the divorce did wake me up to how much I care about family, how much I care about my kids. Like going through that divorce, I didn't care about my career. I didn't care about any of the books I'd written. I just didn't care about them. Like they all seemed dumb compared to, losing time with my kids or having that family that we'd built kind of come apart. And so I'm discovering a new balance where I make sure I put extra emphasis and effort into my family, because it is super important to me, and that needs to show up in the amount of time I give it. And so it's just tough. What kind of gets sacrificed? I don't have many hobbies. Thankfully, my favorite hobby is kind of writing, but like it's pretty much my whole life is either wearing my dad hat, wearing my book writer hat, or wearing my promoter hat. Like I'm doing one of those 3 things almost all the time, and it's constantly, there's a constant effort. And hey, everybody's trying to balance their lives, right? Everybody's trying to get the right balance of, no matter what your job is, enough work, enough fun, enough family. Try to keep your soul alive. Try to keep your connections healthy. And yeah, I'm in that same effort as everybody else. Trying to write new stuff and trying to promote the stuff I've written and trying to like keep my relationships healthy. Like that's a pretty full-time gig.
It is, and it's important to be able to have that balance, because otherwise you might lose your mind sometimes.
Yeah, you really, truly, and it's, you all know, like life can be exhausting sometimes, and finding that balance feels like you find that balance, and then something new gets added to the equation, and you have to rediscover that balance. And yeah, that's my life day to day.
Yeah. So another question, Kira asks, why did you write? What is your advice to aspiring young authors?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a question that I would ask writers when I was an aspiring young writer. And I would say this, I would say, pay attention to your favorite books. Pay attention to how your favorite authors build their scenes. Pay attention to how they build the scenes, and practice writing your own scenes. And as you practice writing your own scenes, you'll get to be putting into practice what you're trying to pay attention to, right? You'll be able to pay attention to your favorite writer's best scenes. You'll be able to notice new details as you try to write. Kind of like if you go play golf and try to golf, you have this new appreciation when you watch golf on TV and see how good the pros are. And it's similar. Like as you try to write your own scenes and tell your own stories, you'll gain appreciation. Like, wow, there really is an art to this. Some people are really good at it, and you start paying attention to how your favorite authors build their scenes. Try to learn from that. Practice writing your own scenes, and as you read a lot and write a lot, you will just get better over time. And try to find that story that you just wish existed. That story that it's so dumb that no one's told this story yet, because it would be the best idea ever. And you write that best idea ever, and that's what we're trying to do.
Perfect. That's so helpful, especially for young writers and young authors.
Well, and it's funny because it's very similar to the advice and what experienced authors should be doing, right?
Yep.
I'm the same thing. I'm always trying to pay attention to who's telling stories well and how are they telling them well and what can I learn from what they're doing well, and then trying to find the coolest story that I feel like is unwritten and make that my next book, you know.
We love to hear it. So we got about 5 minutes left. So I wanted to kind of finish up with some rapid fire, getting to know Brandon Mull questions for everyone. So if you're ready, I'll start with the first question. What is the first thing you do when you wake up in the morning?
Oh, the first thing, breakfast probably. I like to eat, and so that brings me back to the land of the living when I go find some breakfast.
Yes. What is like your favorite breakfast that you can have?
Yeah, favorite breakfast is probably like a fried egg on a piece of toast with little cheese. Like to me, that's heavenly. I probably have it 4 days a week.
That sounds wonderful. What is a random weird fact no one would know about you?
What's a random weird fact no one would know about you? That's a hard one because I give some of my weird things over the years, but I guess I mean this is one from my bios. I won a pudding eating contest in the park behind my grandma's house. We're just random. But that's been in some of my bios, so it might not be weird if people have really been following me and paying attention to my bios.
I'm sure not a lot of people knew that, but now we do.
Yeah.
So even still, it's good. So what would you say is the strangest thing you've ever eaten?
Strangest thing I've ever eaten is probably whale blubber. I ate some bowhead whale blubber, which in Alaska, which was given to me by a native Alaskan. Which oddly, that was eating the blubber of an endangered species.
Oh,
And you know, I did not hunt it. Like the native Alaskans are allowed to hunt these certain kinds of endangered species because it's part of their heritage and tradition. But it was very, very chewy, incredibly chewy. Not my first choice, but an interesting experience to try it.
Oh, that sounds very interesting.
Yeah, very unusual.
If you could trade lives with anyone, living or dead, for a day, who would it be and why?
Ooh, living or dead, huh? Yeah, these are rapid fire questions, but they're also kind of hard.
They're a little hard.
Yeah, like if I could trade lives with anyone, it would be fun to like. What pops into my head is it'd be fun to trade lives with William Shakespeare for a day, and go see that time and go see what his day to day was like. But like I don't know, like I would also be interested in almost anybody who lives in a different place and time. If I could go jump in there for a day and check it out, I probably could have a very interesting day almost anywhere.
I can imagine. That would be very interesting to experience.
Yeah.
Who is your favorite superhero and why?
Okay. Well, you know, like I guess I'd probably have to go with Batman because it's it's a it's a it's a normal mortal, you know, like a vanilla mortal who is dealing with enormous trauma and pain in this strange, interesting, heroic, almost kind of twisted vigilante kind of way. Um, he's very interesting, and my editor Lisa at Simon and Schuster, she's so fascinated by Batman that it was pretty contagious, and she got me pretty interested in Batman too.
Read that wrong. What is your favorite summer activity?
You know what? Like I think it might be whitewater rafting. When I get a chance to go whitewater rafting, I take it. And I just was kayaking whitewater with some young men in my neighborhood, like a church group, and I tipped over in the rapids, and I still like it, like, even though it was kind of scary. But yeah, like whitewater rafting is really fun to me. I also love to like just go to the beach and boogie board. I grew up doing that.
What is your favorite movie quote?
It's probably that Gandalf one about like you can't choose the time you live in. You can only choose the time that's given to you. I probably can't even quote it perfectly, but that's one of the wisest things I think ever said in fiction that help you cope with hard times.
I love that. What is your favorite joke?
That's tough. What comes to mind is, anybody want a peanut? Like from Princess Bride. That was
Yeah,
really funny. Yeah. No more rhymes. Anybody want a peanut? That popped into my head, so maybe that is, like, I don't know, like for like a traditional joke, I don't know, like nothing's coming to mind, but for some reason Princess Bride came to mind.
It's all good. We love Princess Bride. How many books have you read so far this year?
Less than probably most people would think. Maybe 2 or 3, something like that. Like, I've been really busy and stressed about deadlines with Dragonwatch, and it like I said, like, it crushes my hobbies. And my it's weird because part of your fuel as a writer is reading. I mean, it is part of what helps you develop. And goodness, like, it's, yeah, sometimes under deadline, there's time to be dad and there's time to write, and that's about it. But
Yes.
if I had the year to myself, I'd probably read about a book a week. If I, when I'm retired, I imagine I'll be a really big reader, because it's one of my favorite go-to things when I have time.
Right. So what was the last book that you read?
Well, I read a churchy type book, but the last fiction book I read, what was it? It was it's what I'm almost done with. It's Goose Girl by Shannon Hale, which is, like, the writing's really good in it, and I hadn't read it before. I'm friends with Shannon, but I just hadn't read Goose Girl yet. I'd read Princess Academy. But yeah, it's really good.
One of my favorites as a little girl. So
you like that one? Yeah, no, I was just reading that last week, and yeah, I'm not done with it yet, but it's really good.
All right, last question. What advice did you get that was the most rewarding?
Most rewarding advice. I think I really like the advice, give them you until you is what they want. Like, in that idea of, you don't have to be somebody else. You don't have to chase trends. Just creatively give them what you think is awesome until what you think is awesome is what they want. And, but by staying true to your best self, your best voice, your best idea of story, trusting that will be your best road to having success, is just doing what you think is really good work. For me, that's been true. And it's true. Like, it took me a while to get started, but by writing my best work and what I thought was cool, and not really chasing trends, but writing what was most interesting to me. I think if my stuff is fun, that's the reason it is because I'm really sincerely writing the book that I wish existed, and that to me is super fun.
That is great advice, and definitely something that we could all apply to our own lives. So I just want to thank you, Brandon, for joining us today for this discussion. That'll be about all for us today, but I did want to remind everyone that if you're not part of the Fablehaven Book Club, we are just starting Dragonwatch Book 2, and so you can join us as we reread and make our way to October with the release of Dragonwatch Book 5, Return of the Dragon Slayers, which comes out October 26th. So, much more exciting things to come, and you'll see lots of different announcements coming your way. So we're excited to share the finale with all of you. So thanks for coming, and have a good rest of your day, everyone.
Thanks, Callie.
See ya.